Heard that phytic acid is bad for you? Have you heard that we should be soaking or sprouting all of our grains because there's an anti-nutrient in whole grains and you're going to be nutrient deficient? Do you follow these channels? Have you read these books? Do you do sourdough because of the phytic acid? Well, then hold up, buttercup, because you're going to want to watch this video before you soak or sprout another grain. Hey y'all, welcome back to Grains and Grit, where I talk all the things real whole grains from a biblical perspective. I've been milling my wheat for over a decade. I teach you how to use real whole grains to mill that wheat yourself to make all the things with freshly milled wheat and all the grains as well. We do not shy away from grains here on this channel. Because I've been working with grains for this long, I know a thing or two because, I've seen a thing or two. And this one is actually a big one. One of the big hangups when it comes to grains, a huge question that I get is, what about phytic acid? Is phytic acid bad for us? Are we going to be nutrient deficient if we are consuming a high quantity of the unfermented, unsoaked, unsprouted grains? And you may have these books right here, or you may follow these accounts as well. And one big thing that they say is phytic acid is bad. It's an anti-nutrient and we need to soak and sprout our grains as our ancestors have done. And don't get me wrong, I love these books and I love these channels. And if you do not already follow all of them or have these books, you should. I love these channels and I love these men and women who have taught me so much about real whole food, traditional foods, biblical eating, all the things. But bless the hearts, they just dead wrong on this one. Or at the very least, you don't have the whole picture. So there are two parts of this argument that I'm going to cover. First of all, what is phytic acid? What are people saying about it? Why is it bad? Why is it not bad? Like all the things, dealing with what is the overall thing with phytic acid. And then I'm actually going to talk to you people who do sourdough, specifically those who do sourdough for the point of reducing your phytic acid, because you may be wasting your time. You're just going to want to hang on and hear me out. Do not dismiss me. Do not crucify me yet. Just hear what I have to say. Now, all my resources will be either up here on the screen so you can check them out yourself. I will also be linking them in the description box below. But before we begin, comment below. Do you soak or sprout your grains? Are you a diehard anti-phytic acid person? I would just like to know. Let me know where you're at before you watch this video, and then at the end you can tell me where you're at afterwards. All right, so first of all, simple definition. What is phytic acid? If you were brand new to this whole argument, let's just get the basics. Here's the definition according to Healthline. Phytic acid, or phytate, is found in plant seeds. It serves as the main form of storage for phosphorus in the seeds. Then when seeds sprout, phytate is broken down and the phosphorus is released. The phosphorus will be used by the young plant. Phytic acid is also known as inositol hexaphosphate. That's a mouthful. Or IP6. And the simple explanation of that was too much is phytic acid breaks down when the seed is sprouted, and it helps feed that young plant as it goes into a big plant. Now, let's talk about what they say about phytic acid and the common argument of why phytic acid is an anti-nutrient and why it is seen as bad. So first off, we have the wonderful and awesome and amazing Miss Mary's Nest. New cookbook out. Love the cookbook, buy the cookbook. But again, I was very sad. She has a whole chapter about getting started with home baking and talking about whole grains. She even advocates milling your wheat, baking with whole grains. If you have a cookbook, this is page 112, where she actually talks about, the fact that whole grains contain phytic acid, which can make it difficult to digest the whole grains and thereby difficult to absorb the nutrients. It can also strip additional nutrients from your body. So unless you are working with whole grain dough that has been soaked, sprouted, or soured, you want to limit how much whole grain flour you add to your bread baking repertoire. She at least does say, however, there is an upside to phytic acid, which we'll discuss in the sourdough section. But again, this is just kind of where you don't get the whole picture. Now, these are actually the big ones. The Maker's Diet, again, amazing book. You should read it. He cured his Crohn's disease by going to a biblical diet. Love it. He repeats what Miss Sally Fallon says in Nourishing Traditions. Again, love her. Love the Weston A. Price Foundation. They still advocate whole grains, but this is where their argument really falls off the rails. And I think a lot of people are getting the argument from this book. And when you read it, and if you've been following this channel long enough, you will immediately see the problem we have with the argument. So allow me to read a section from the book. This is on sprouted grains, nuts, and seeds, page 112. And tell me if you caught this before I even explained it. But what she states is she is quoting an enzyme specialist, Dr. Edward Howell, and he states, in the past, we ate most of our grains in partially germinated form. Grains standing in sheaves and stacks in open fields often began to sprout before it was brought into storage. Modern farming techniques prevent grains from germinating before they reach our tables. And then it talks about why sprouted grains are better because of modern ancient farming techniques. And I did a video on that. You can watch it up here if you want to go into that further. But we'll get into why that is not a good argument at all later on. And the main argument for this is there's kind of two arguments. One is that, like this one from Nourishing Traditions, is farming technique. It was sprouted in the field, so they were consuming mostly sprouted grains or fermented grains back in the day. Our ancestors were doing it. We should as well. The second argument is the fact that modern science has shown that phytic acid, they call it an anti-nutrient, which means that, quote, it is being taught that untreated phytic acid can combine with calcium, magnesium, copper, iron, and especially zinc in the intestinal tract and block their absorption. It is being said that a diet high in unfermented whole grains supposedly can lead to serious mineral deficiencies and bone loss, which sounds absolutely terrifying. I get it. I don't want to be deficient in iron, especially if you already have an iron deficiency. Not the whole picture. Stay tuned. So now let's actually see what the evidence says about this. First of all, let's just think of common sense. As I was reading this about the ancient farming techniques, and again, I went into this deeper in the in that video about ancient farming techniques, really addressing this argument. Y'all, if you've had grains long enough, you never want your grains to get wet. They get wet, they then sprout. And sprouted grains do not store. It goes bad fast. Go, wet your grains, see them sprout, and see how quickly they go bad and rancid. And y'all, I'm telling you, they reek. You don't want them. The reason why they actually put it in sheaves is to keep it from being wet. So that argument is completely, absolutely 110% false. It's just false. Now, another article you really want to dive deep. I do recommend that you check out Sue Becker's article all about phytic acid. I think I can link it up here. I will also be linking it in the description box below because she points out a lot of great things. In fact, she actually quotes a woman who wrote a book. It's called Diet for the Atomic Age by Sarah Shannon. I personally have not gotten my hands on this book. I really would like to. If you have, comment below. Let me know like what page number and all that stuff this quote is from. But they basically talk about the chelating abilities of phytic acid. The fact that we live in such a toxic environment that those chelating abilities actually could really work to our advantage of getting rid of the excess chemicals and things like that from our body. And Sue Becker mentions that studies actually show that phytic acid actually produces phytase in our intestines, which actually help break down the phytic acid. So our bodies produce phytase in and of itself to actually help break down all of that. So we don't have to break it down before we eat it ourselves. I hope that makes sense. Again, read the article for more information. Next one I really want to get into is more current information. This was an interview that I found from last year, pretty much a year ago, by where a doctor was actually interviewed, a gastroenterologist. Let me try that again. Gastroenterologist, which, as the name implies, a gut doctor. And so this is an actual medical professional, a doctor, because as you know, I'm not a medical professional. This is not medical advice, so on and so forth. Consult your doctor. But here is a doctor. And what he said completely blew me away. But this is Dr. Buzowick. I am so sorry for mispronouncing that. He actually stated that there are no studies or evidence showing groups who consume high amounts of unfermented grains. So they are consuming a high amount of phytic acid. There are no studies or groups that he has seen in all of these years showing any sort of mineral deficiencies. Quite the contrary, he was seeing that those who actually do consume a lot of phytic acid, they're consuming a lot of these whole grains, they actually tend to live longer because Oh, here's a shock. Phytic acid is actually anti-inflammatory and an antioxidant. It's actually good for us. He stated that basically, if you're just consuming a balanced diet, you're going to be fine because the benefits that come from whole grains far outweigh the little bit of phytic acid that is in those grains. It just balances out. And I'll talk about my thoughts later on about what to do is if, about basically my opinion, if all you have are grains that you are living on. But bottom line is, so long as you're eating a well-balanced diet, it's okay. And I think he made an excellent point that many times, the reason why we have this study of the phytic acid is an anti-nutrient. He said, because it's studied in a test tube. And if you take phytic acid out and then you put it in a test tube and you only study that and see what that only phytic acid does without all the other nutrients and everything that usually accompanies phytic acid, then yeah, it's gonna look bad. But no one is actually talking about how it looks when you combine phytic acid with the iron and the calcium and the fiber and all the other nutrients, the B vitamins and everything like that that you get in these whole grains. No one's actually studied that. So real quick, brief pause here. We just got to mention, so you know I'm all about milling wheat, but the thing is you need the wheat. And speaking of hard red and hard white, no better place to get it than 4 Generations Organic Farms. I absolutely love their organic wheat berries. They are grown right here in the U.S. in Oklahoma. They are an excellent company and people to work with. You really get a personalized touch. I did a video all about touring their facilities, but I do recommend them if you're on the hunt for good quality wheat berries. These are clean, organically raised by people who truly care. So be sure to check them out. Just go to grainsandgrit.com/4generations and use the code grainsandgrit for 10% off. And thank you so very much to 4 Generations for Organic Farms. And thank you to all of you who actually shop with them and get organic wheat berries because you're supporting our organic wheat farmers, which we very much need. And you help support this channel as well. Now, what really blew my mind was I actually found a study done by the University of Colorado and Colorado Springs. I'm so thrilled that they actually have, because this study is really about to blow your mind about phytic acid. So this is the handy dandy little chart. I will link it below and we're going to put it up here on the screen because I wanted to walk through this study that was done. So as you can see here, it's fermentation and phytic acid in ancient wheat. Now, here is what was really fascinating. So in this abstract, I'll sum it up for you, but they were taking sourdough bread with ancient yeast and modern yeast, and they were using whole grains, okay? They were milling it themselves. They even show which wheats that they got and where they got it from. And they're gonna compare, they're measuring the phytic acid with the grains first. We're gonna mill the flour. This is whole grain flour, just like we use at home, freshly milled wheat. They're milling the flour. They're measuring the phytic acid. And then they add commercial yeast to it. And then they measure that whenever it is baked, what is the phytic acid. And then they did a study where they milled the wheat. They then did a sourdough ferment and they measured it after 24 hours and then after 48-hour fermentation for the phytic acid levels. Hopefully you're following so far. So as you can see down here on the chart, the goal of the study was to determine how phytic acid levels differ between a classic yeast loaf and a fermented loaf. It is now the true battle between sourdough and commercial yeast. Fermenting or not fermenting? Let us find out. And of course, they were also comparing ancient wheats and locally adapted wheats. I mean, literally, this was the perfect study. Like, good job. Okay, they then go and explain what their methods were. So just look at that. We'll skip over that for now. But I want you to see, let's scroll down to the results. So first result that we see is a flour sample. So as you can see, they have hard red wheat, hard white wheat. They took einkorn, emmer, and spelt. And you can see here the phytic acid. This is grams of phytic acid per 100 grams of the flour. And then you can see the chart here, the figure 1, sourdough versus yeast. So the blue line is the hard white wheat, and then the yellow line is the hard white wheat with yeast. So the blue line is with sourdough. The yellow is with yeast. And you can see that the flour, they were the same. And then 1 hour after adding the yeast, you can see where the phytic acid is there. And then you can see 24 hours with the hard white. With the sourdough, roughly about the same compared to 1 hour with the yeast and 24 hours with the sourdough. And then, of course, 48 hours with the sourdough, much lower. Figure 3, the phytic acid levels from flour to bread. Hard red wheat went down 64%. Hard white wheat went down 67%. Einkorn increased in phytic acid. It didn't even break it down. It increased the phytic acid in einkorn, which is a beloved grain for many, many people. Let's do discussion and conclusion, shall we, in case you did not catch that. Phytic acid is substantially lower after the fermentation process in all wheat except einkorn. Now, here's the important part. The yeast loaf lowered phytic acid. So yes, even yeast bread can lower phytic acid, as in like commercial yeast. But there was a larger decrease seen after 48 hours of sourdough fermentation, which makes a whole lot of sense. So yes, fermentation with sourdough, the longer it ferments, the more the phytic acid is broken down. No disagreement there. But what I was absolutely amazed is, first of all, phytic acid can be broken down with just yeast, just even an hour-long fermentation with yeast. It is still broken down quite significantly, as you can see. But what really blew my mind is it increased with einkorn, which completely goes against the grain. Yeah, I said it, pun intended. It went against the grain. So I hope this makes sense, because I know scientific studies aren't for everyone, but this just baffled my mind. As bottom line, you don't have to use sourdough to break down that phytic acid. Commercial yeast is going to break it down as well, just in your normal, typical fermentation. It's going to be broken down a little bit. And then einkorn increased. So like, what do you do with that? Which leads us to the big thing, that you may be wasting time with your sourdough. And the biggest thing, you've heard, if you've been around this channel, you've heard me say it before. If you are making sourdough with store-bought flour, if you are not milling your own wheat, using whole grain bread, and you are wanting to make sourdough because you've heard it reduces the phytic acid and makes it easier to digest, you are wrong, okay? Because guess where the phytic acid is in wheat? It is in the bran, in the germ, in that outer layer, which all three are being removed when it comes to making white flour. I don't care if it's King Arthur's flour, organic flour. If it is not true whole grain, it has the entire wheat germ and outer layer. Honey, my friend, you pretty much don't have any phytic acid. So that's why I say that if that's the only reason you're making sourdough, you're wasting your time. Now, if you do want to do it with whole milled wheat, that is going to reduce the phytic acid, as we saw in this study, unless you use einkorn, in which case you're increasing your phytic acid. Now, pure Felicia opinion right now. So what if you're not eating a balanced diet? What if all you have are whole grains? Are you going to become mineral deficient? And that is where there is a possibility. Yes, if all you're consuming is just grains, you have no eggs, you have no veggies, you have no fruit, you have no honey. I mean, you got nothing, okay? Nada, nothing else, okay? Maybe, okay? Even then, remember, your body creates phytase in the intestine. You already have this going on in our body. So personally, I don't think so. But let's go with the argument that you're not eating a balanced diet. Then soak or sprout them. I would do both. There are advantages to soaking and sprouting your wheat. I have talked about that before. There's a time to do it. Your vitamin C skyrockets, your vitamin A skyrockets. It really helps give you a balanced diet. If you are soaking your grains as well as consuming unfermented grains, I think if you were to do that, you would have a pretty good balanced diet just like that. So again, so long as you're just eating a balanced diet, just eat real food that God created to be good food. You'll be good. Now, if you really want to dive into the whole sourdough versus commercial yeast battle of the grains debate, be sure to watch this video right here. And if you want to learn more about milling your wheat, all the things, what you need to get started, then this video right here is for you. Be sure to comment below. Let me know your thoughts on this video. To subscribe to this channel if you like all these things, and I'll see you next week. Bye.